Hi, this is Phoenix, and I'm going to talk about my soon-to-be released book, The Street Kid. I'm very proud of this book, and I'm very happy to get it in your hands in the future. I'm going to talk a little bit about it. Usually it's recommended not to have disclaimers or to explain your book or to explain yourself, but I feel like I am kind of inextricably bound up with my work, and because of that, I feel the need to not necessarily explain it, but talk about it to kind of encourage discussion. Because sometimes I think when the author isn't open and candid about kind of their ideas and perhaps even intentions with their book, and they don't delve into the backstory and the like, that sometimes discussion can stagnate, and I definitely don't want that. So, um, so what is The Street Kid? Well, it's my autofiction, as uh, you might know. So it's my fictionalized autobiography. Um, and The Street Kid, basically, the process of writing The Street Kid, of working with the book, of thinking through the story and the like, is why I became Phoenix. Because people know me as Phoenix, and I became Phoenix because of this book, and because I wrote this book. And so, um, Phoenix is indeed the main character in the book. He's the protagonist, and the book is told from his perspective. And you might be wondering why I chose the name Phoenix. Well, of course, there's the more obvious reason, such as the fact that I'm very fascinated by the metaphysics of the phoenix, the idea of birth and rebirth, death and redeath, of being born and being reborn and dying and redying, and this cycle that I at least tend to find myself in. And it's not the cliched sense of good and bad things alternating in our lives. So having good moments, happy moments, and then having bad moments, devastating moments, and all of that alternating in a cycle, in a cyclical format. Rather, it's something much more metaphysical and much more hopeful. It's this idea of allowing all of the negative things in your life, allowing the negative feelings that you might have, allowing the negative environment around you, allowing just the negativity in general, the darkness, the sadness, the angst, the loneliness, compress you to the point to where you rise from the ashes and you are reborn. And that's what's really important to me. And dying is whenever you lose your energy, whenever your energy has been drained because you've given this world all you've got, and you basically need to just relax and let yourself lie down in the ashes. But there's a more factual reason of why I chose the name Phoenix, and I'm going to explain that. When I was 15, I was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder, which was a really intense experience in my life. And it was interesting. And so all of this is detailed in the first part of this book, this experience, even if it's a little fictionalized. But basically, what happened was during this time, I was delusional, as I was going to be diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder, and I was delusional, and I thought that I was dead. Hence the title of the first part, Death Before Birth. So I was barely being born, just being a teenager and the like, and yet I was already dying. I was already dead. And so that delusion actually becomes a plot point for that specific part of the book, the first part. But it's interesting because there's Phoenix, right? Phoenix, the mythical bird, and the metaphysics behind the phoenix. But then there's also um, the shirt that I was wearing when I was hospitalized. I remember being rushed to the hospital because they believed something was certainly wrong with me because I was roaming around the city, catatonic and lost. And it was very, very intense, a very, very intense experience. And and so what they did was I was wearing a Phoenix, Arizona shirt, and they cut through the shirt. And I think that even in that moment where I was completely psychotic, delusional, and the like, out of touch with reality, I was so in touch with reality that I knew that everything in my life as I knew it was going to change. And I immediately grafted onto the metaphor of Phoenix, not just the bird, but also Phoenix, Arizona. Now, I don't really know that much about Phoenix, Arizona, in all honesty. I know that it's hot, and so the heat itself can be metaphorical for the phoenix, and the powerful heat of the phoenix. But Phoenix has always represented kind of a mystical place for me. Even though if I travel to Phoenix now, I could be, it would be pretty apparent that nothing magical would happen. In my mind, I conceive of Phoenix, Arizona as a very metaphysical place because I was wearing that shirt and it's imbued with a lot of meaning for me. And so that's the double meaning behind Phoenix, because it represents Phoenix, Arizona, and it represents Phoenix the bird, as well as everything that brings into focus. And so, you might be wondering why Phoenix is also a street kid. So Phoenix is indeed a street kid throughout the book. Basically, he's not a street kid immediately, but eventually, as you'll find out, I don't want to give too much away for those that read it, but if, he slowly segs into becoming a street kid. It becomes his freedom, and he essentially becomes an immortal teenager living on the streets. And so you might be wondering why I chose such an interesting metaphor of homelessness, an interesting metaphor of the street kid. Now I have to be honest, I've definitely worked with homeless people, and they definitely don't always achieve my romanticized notion of homelessness. And that romanticized notion of homelessness is like really good people that are just down on their luck. So I hate to say this, but the cliche of Gavroche from Les Miserables, or Oliver Twist from Charles Dickens' book, Oliver Twist, or even Ragged Dick from Horatio Alger Jr.'s book, and the like. And so all of that I think is definitely important to keep in mind. That I've realized that the homeless condition is much, much more complex, and that I do it a service by romanticizing it in that innocent light. You know, because there's crime, there's heavy drug use, there's so much depression and mental illness. There's debilitating illnesses, physical illnesses. There's hopelessness, there's despair, there's exploitation. The list goes on, and there's no way that it fits this romanticizing notion. And yet that's exactly what I try to imbue Phoenix the street kid as a street kid with. Phoenix definitely struggles with his mind. He struggles with his thoughts, but the idea is for his innocence to shine through despite all of that, despite the fact that he's poor, despite the fact that he has nothing, but essentially his imaginary friends. And that even though he's destitute, he can still find happiness. Even though he is mentally ill, he can still try to find mental peace and contentment. And I think that's important to mind, and that's why I chose the metaphor for the street kid. But it also represents alienation and displacement. And so if I was going to analyze it, I think that displacement represents a lot for me as Phoenix. Definitely my alienation from society, perhaps the alienation that my mental illness causes me, and definitely the like. So those are things to keep in mind. Now, you might be wondering what this book means to me, and I would say that that's a very difficult question, but I think it's a great question. I don't know what this book means to me, but I would say it is an attempt to understand my life. It is an attempt to understand my soul. That may be a very essentialist claim, which we tend to avoid in postmodern rhetoric, but generally I think that that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to discover my essence, and I'm also trying to ask questions and answer questions that are very near to me and very hard to answer. One of those questions would be a very simple question, and that is, why do we suffer? And what does and we could extend that further to, what does that suffering mean? And I think this book is an explication of that idea of what suffering means, what my suffering means. Because it's very interesting, because I would say that even though Phoenix suffers clearly in this book, I would say that it's a lot more complicated than that. Because the suffering gives Phoenix's life meaning, and it makes Phoenix who he is, and that's the complexity and the nuance of suffering. And that's kind of what we can get out of suffering, even if we don't understand it. And of course, it may not be the best justification ever, but I think it's the best justification that at least Phoenix can come through. And that's what's so magical, is his imaginary friends take him to so many wonderful places. You know, Tyson shows Phoenix all of the tricks of the trade with the mind, for instance. Tyson's a very important character, um, and uh, and it's really remarkable how Tyson influences Phoenix in terms of his mind, and in terms of Phoenix's mind and how Phoenix thinks about his mind and the like. And it's very powerful, I would say. And so, what this book means to me is it's basically kind of a way of freeing myself. It's a way of freeing myself in the pages of what I consider to be a very nuanced book, what some might see as a very complex book, and what I see as a book that is important that I wrote. It was important that I wrote it. And I'm very, very happy that I wrote it, and I'm very pleased. And I hope that I can connect with the readers that are out there. And I know that all of this is intense, of course, but this book is definitely going to be intense. But I hope that you enjoy it. And I guess I would say, just to conclude, that's the bittersweetness of this book. That is the bittersweetness of Phoenix, or me, and why I became Phoenix, why I became the street kid, why the street kid is a metaphor for me, and is a metaphor for the world in many ways, is because, sure, we may suffer in various ways, whether it's because we're destitute and poor, whether it's because we're alone and we struggle mentally, and with our psychological torment, or various other reasons. But whatever the reason, we still find meaning and we still find purpose, and that's where the power is. And that's definitely one of the messages that I hope to convey in this book. That even though Phoenix struggles with notions of suicide, and then he also struggles with realizing that his mind is essentially thinking about incorrect ideas. It's thinking about impossible ideas that aren't true. And even though Phoenix even hurts himself at various points in delusional mindsets, which you'll discover, for instance, in the second part called The Mountain of Pain, which was a real experience, modeled on my experiences at least, because it is autofictional, so there's some fiction. But the point is, you can still find meaning in all of that, and that's what I hope that you can take away from it. Again, this is Phoenix, and thank you.